Hello once again, and welcome to another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. I'm joined by the AgriNews Director for 620 CKRM Regina, Ryan Young, and the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hursh. I'm your host, Doug Falconer, Agriculture Director at GX94 in Yorkton. First of all, we'll talk about the latest crop reports that came out from Saskatchewan and Manitoba this week. Saskatchewan's report says the harvest is 97% complete, while Manitoba's report says harvest there is 85% complete. Do those numbers jump out at you at all at this time of year, Kevin?
Well, we're dang near done. Dang near got it finished up. Still a bit to do in Manitoba. So it's great to not have the harvest drag along. I can remember the worst harvest for lateness I ever had. The Christmas trees were starting to go up in the stores before I was finished, and that's never a good feeling. So it's great to be done. There's actually, I imagine, a lot of producers actually waiting for a bit of a cool down for cooler soil temperatures for both soil testing and for the application of some residual herbicides for next year that need to go on, but the soil should be cooler than it is now. And we've had much warmer temperatures than normal. So lots of fall work still to be done in many areas, and producers are sort of awaiting a favorable weather for that.
Now, Ryan, you had a report this week from the Canadian Western Agribition with CEO Sean Kindoff on how important the Canadian Western Agribition is to the Saskatchewan economy.
Yeah, and even he was surprised on how high the numbers were. Just to give a little few statistics for examples, you can find the full details on saskagtoday.com if anyone wants to jump into that. But overall, for economic activity in the province, last year's agribition generated $116.5 million, and that includes around $69.6 million to the provincial GDP. So those are really good numbers in terms of providing a lot of economic spin-off, and that includes people staying at hotels, meals, jobs. That also created about just over 1,000 jobs in the province, including around 212 here in Regina. So it's definitely a economic driver for the province. Canadian Western Agribition is, and Sean Kindopp said, "I'm really surprised to see the numbers being so high, but it just kind of goes to show that." They're really proud of those numbers and the hard work that they do to put the show together because it involves a lot of people. I mean, they have less than 15 year-round staff, and a lot are part-time or contract workers for 2 to 4 months out of the year. So it takes a lot of effort to put it all together and for everyone to kind of come here to the capital of Saskatchewan. It just is really kind of cool to see numbers wise, and I'm sure they're going to be touting more of that as we get closer to this year's show.
Kevin, are you surprised by those numbers?
The numbers are always interesting to come out, and I certainly understand an organization like Agribition wanting to actually pay the money to do the study, to come out with the numbers, because that proves the point as to how important they are to the economy. And without an analysis in that regard, you can talk anecdotally about how important you are to the economy, but having hard numbers put together by a third party investigator, I think is really valuable to the organization, and I certainly understand why they go to the effort to do that.
And Farm Credit Canada put out a news release this week about farmland values, their midterm report on farmland values, and it showed that Saskatchewan, I guess, was leading the way for the most part when it came to increases in farmland value.
I was surprised at 7.4% in Saskatchewan for the first 6 months of the year, ahead of the national average, which is 5.5, and leading the nation as far as all the other provinces. Um, it is again the first half of the year. The first half of the year was before the tap turned off in many areas and the heat cranked up, and before some of the grain price decreases we saw. So it'll be interesting to see in March when the numbers come out for the full year, because farm cash receipts are softening. Now, whether that's still going to affect farmland prices or have a very big effect is hard to know, but 7.4% for just half the year. I was surprised at that the increase had been so large. The other thing we'll see in the full year long report is how the various regions break down, and I would suspect that there's going to be quite a regional difference between areas that have had good crops in recent years and areas that have not. So it'll be nice to see when those much more detailed analysis comes out in March.
I know they did say that central and northern Saskatchewan saw the biggest gains and southern Saskatchewan saw smaller ones. So that's not a surprise considering the drought situation that usually seems to pervade through southern Saskatchewan. On to the next topic, we wanted to talk about markets. So we see canola has gone down about $13 per metric ton on the ICE futures canola market since last Friday. Any surprise by that at all, Kevin?
It's hard to tell with canola because it certainly can be volatile. A $13 a ton drop through the week is not large. We've seen drops of $20 and $25 a day sometimes, and gains of $13 in just a day. Beyond canola, we've seen some strength. I've seen some strengthening durum bids. I've seen some continued strength in large green lentil prices this week. So there is some uptrend on some other crops, even though canola was a little softer over the week.
Has there been any speculation as to what's causing these prices to go up and down like this?
No, I think it's a multitude of factors out there rather than one specific thing. And you get various analysis on each of the crops as to supply and demand and who's stocking up and who's changing trade rules. So all of that goes into the mix, but there's not one overriding factor that we can point to, which in the past was the initiation of the war in Ukraine, for instance, or something like that. That's a big effect that affects everything. Nothing really that you can point to in that regard that I know of.
All right, and of course it's Thursday, and that means that the Montreal dock workers went on strike again today. It's an overtime strike for an indefinite duration. Have you been following this, Ryan? Have you had a chance to be following it?
I've been keeping tabs on what's been happening over at the Port of Montreal, and this just kind of adds another layer to the overall dispute. I know scheduling is definitely one of the main sticking points when it comes to negotiations between the union and the Maritime Employers Association, which are still trying to hammer out a deal. They've had federal mediators work alongside them, but nothing has come to fruition to this point, and the question of how long it lasts remains to be seen. Now, the union says that, or the Employers Association, can't remember which side said what, but they basically said that this strike on overtime is going to have a big impact on operations, but I guess we'll see what happens. It kind of sounds like that they're still kind of technically working, just kind of doing the regular shift, but anything extra past that would be a no-go, so to speak.
Do Western Canadian farmers have anything to be significantly concerned about when it comes to this, Kevin?
The losers are slowed down movement and missed contracts or delayed sales of containerized crops going out of those two terminals in the Port of Montreal. So containerized shipments, you think of things like large green lentils, mustard, perhaps some canary seed to Europe, those sorts of commodities that are containerized and go predominantly east rather than west would be affected. Hard to join the dots and say it's meant this sort of a price decline or this much delayed delivery, but it's all part of the supply chain and will be having an effect on those crops.
And just to kind of add to that as well, I remember my conversation with Greg Northey from Pulse Canada, kind of going over the supply chain, and he said a bulk of our shipments, about 70%, go to the Port of Vancouver. Roughly 20% goes to the Port of Montreal, and then the remaining balance split between Thunder Bay and Prince Rupert. Now, 20% doesn't sound like much, but when you look at the amount of containerized grain, for example, and other shipments, it's in the millions of tons. So it is significant, and the Port of Montreal does play a role in our exports, but not as big compared to the Port of Vancouver.
All right, well, we heard that late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, that Hurricane Milton made landfall in Florida, hitting the Tampa Bay region pretty hard. We've had reports that this could affect and has affected fertilizer and phosphate production. Is that something to be concerned about?
I think it is something to watch, and you get various reports on how big the effect will be. This isn't prime time for phosphate use, so they do have time to get up and running again and be a supplier. And exactly where the Hurricane Milton hit and how long facilities might be out or how long employees might take to be able to get back to the job seems to be largely unknown. I know Josh Linville of StoneX is a fertilizer expert there, and he's been speculating, but nobody seems to be ringing alarm bells. However, I would note that phosphate prices have remained very high and are very expensive. So it's certainly not anything that is likely to help the overall situation for phosphate prices. Something to watch for sure, but at this point, really difficult to ascertain just how much effect it's going to have.
And Ryan, this week you've been out on the road a fair bit. You've been doing the CKRM Ranch Roundup. How has that been going?
It's been going fairly well. I've been logging a lot of kilometers and early mornings, so it's kind of weighing on me a little bit after a while. I'm looking forward to Saturday when I'll get a full day's rest. But overall, it's been going pretty good. Had an opportunity to speak to a few livestock producers that have gone to these community pastures around Ituna, around Bursay, um, kind of pick as they were picking up the livestock from the pasture and bringing them back home. Things have been going okay, depending on who you ask. I know all of them, they've had recent rain here in this month, as well as towards the end of September. And it's kind of amazing how a little bit of rain makes a major difference in terms of the pasture land and just how green it is. It's been one of the main sticking, I guess not sticking points, but main points that kind of stick out in my mind. They've been really happy with the moisture that they've been getting. And this morning I was over by the Gary Community Pasture by Ituna, kind of in your area, Doug, and speaking with the manager of the community pasture, Ben Marcino. He said things have been really busy there, but they have been really good. And it's also kind of interesting too, just kind of learning how things work from a pasture perspective, just in terms of the patrons. Kind of the constant thread there is the amount of patrons that are at these pastures. It's in the 20 to 30 range, depending on which one you go to, and they kind of stick with those patrons. It's kind of difficult to try and get in if you're new, but there's definitely a form to fill out if you do want to become a patron of any of those community pastures. Not sure on what the cost is exactly, but I'm sure it's kind of worthwhile in investments. So just little things like that, learning as I go along on these travels, and it's definitely something interesting.
And Kevin, last time we talked to you, you were in Halifax at a conference there. How did that go?
It was Canadian Farm Writers Federation, so got a better feel for Nova Scotia agriculture. So I'll test you guys. What do you beyond seafood? What do you think the number one agricultural export is out of Nova Scotia?
Out
Uh,
of out of the country or out of the
Yeah, out of the
province?
country. Yeah, export out of the country. What's their biggest one by dollar value?
Wine?
No.
hmm. I want to I want to say cattle, but I'm sure it's a trick question. So
Well,
I go
it's
with
actually
potatoes.
wild. It's actually wild blueberries by a fair margin. That's their biggest export. But you never see that for sale in any of the restaurants for some reason. You see lots of lobster and lots of seafood.
Hmm.
But the other thing of interest, only about 2,000 producers, agricultural producers in Nova Scotia, and dominated more than 50% are of net sales is the supply managed industries, dairy and poultry. And of those 2,000 producers, it's estimated that 67% of them have less than $100,000 a year in gross sales. So a lot of smaller producers, a lot of supply managed industries, and some exports on things like blueberries and Christmas trees, but not nearly the export oriented economy that Saskatchewan has. So always interested to see the differences, but also some of the similarities, and younger producers talking about the difficulty of taking over the family farm because land values have gone up. The value of the farm has increased dramatically, but if mom and dad aren't going to give you a break on buying it, you can't cash flow it. And that's a similar story to here on the prairies.
Interesting. On that note, that'll do it for this week's edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of Chief Agricultural Editor Kevin Hursh and 620 CKRM Regina AgriNews Director Ryan Young, I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director Doug Falconer saying so long until next week.